Welcome to our weekly maritime vlog. I'm Corey Ransom with International Maritime Security Associates. We have Bennett, the producer, behind the camera today. This week we are talking hurricane preparedness. Since we are into hurricane season here in the North Atlantic, we thought it'd be a good time, since we're early on in the season and the activity level is usually low, to talk about hurricane preparedness. And I think what we need to do first is to kind of have a little bit of a wrap up of the 2017 season. The 2017 season is the most costliest hurricane season on record. Damage estimates of what it costs were upwards of $282 billion. There were 17 named storms in 2017. 7 of those storms were hurricanes, and of those 7, 6 of those were major hurricanes. So if you remember, in the North Atlantic season, it was a devastating season as we saw devastation into the Caribbean islands, into Puerto Rico, into the Gulf of Mexico, in the United States, and also Florida. So there was a lot of damage created by this season that was a lot higher than what the previous big season was 2005. If we take a look at from a hurricane perspective, I wanted to break down how the world kind of breaks down from a hurricane season. So the North Atlantic season, that encompasses the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, and the United States, starts on June 1st and goes all the way until November 30th. So it's kind of a fairly extended season. With that, the peak of that comes to August to about October. So you have the peak of that season, August to October. If you look at the Pacific season, it's really not bound, but it's looked at as kind of the April to December standpoint. Now, in the Indian Ocean, we have a northern Indian Ocean season and a southern Indian Ocean season. So the northern Indian Ocean season right now is active. It goes April to about December timeframe. But in the southern Indian Ocean, it's actually opposite of what we are here. So because their seasons are completely opposite, we see that their hurricane season goes from November 15th to about May 15th. So we thought it'd be good to start out and talk a little bit about the bounds of the seasons and what happened in 2017. So now let's take a look at what all of the very smart prognosticators have as far as for the 2018 season. And when you look at predictions for weather, we can do a really good job of forecasting weather out to about 36 hours, maybe 48, and then beyond that, the accuracy drops off pretty rapidly. Same thing with hurricanes. It's really difficult. There's a lot of data and information. We've been collecting data on hurricanes from about 1851 until the present. Now, our data collection capabilities and the amount of data that we put into these formulas has improved greatly just over the past 5 to 10 years. So that's helped to improve the climate prediction side of it and also the forecasting side of it. But I think as we integrate artificial intelligence and other facets of programs and data into this, that it's going to get a lot more accurate in the future. It's just bound to anyway. So these guys do a really good job of looking at a whole bunch of data points, and there's multiple websites that we look at when we talk about with hurricanes and the development, but the major source for the climate side of it and kind of the long range, hey, what's the season going to look like? We get that from the Climate Prediction Center. So we'll put a link for the CPC down below. Also, the National Hurricane Center here in the United States, located on the FIU campus in Miami, Florida, they do a phenomenal job of that real-time tracking and information of the storms. One of my favorite weather websites that I like to go to besides those two is also Weather Underground. When you talk about, they have some phenomenal data that you can look at when it comes to storms. So I really like Weather Underground, and we'll have a link to them. If we're talking about the typhoon season, where we move into the northern Indian Ocean side of it, the Joint Typhoon Prediction Center is run by the U.S. Navy. They do a really good job of pushing forward in information in that. So we'll have a link to them as well. So when we talk about a climatological side of what's the season going to look at, there's a couple of things that the Climate Prediction Center looks at. As they look at the sea surface temperature was extremely important, but they also look at what's called the ENSO, or the El Nino Southern Oscillation. So they look at the El Nino La Nina effect. So right now this year, a couple of interesting anomalies are happening here very early on in the hurricane season. Number one, the ENSO is what you would call neutral. So there's no La Nina, El Nino effect. When you see a really high El Nino effect, typically there's a lot of shear in the atmosphere, so you don't see great hurricane development. So right now the ENSO is neutral. The other thing that's really interesting that we pulled off the Climate Prediction Center's kind of prognostication for this season is the sea surface temperature in what they call the MDR, or the main development region, is a lot lower than normal. So right now they're forecasting that the season could be at or potentially below average. However, we're very early on in that, and we know that the sea surface temperatures could escalate very rapidly as we move towards the peak part in August and November. So a couple of stats that I pulled off of the report that I thought were pretty interesting. So with that, the outlook right now is there's a 40% chance of a just standard normal season. On average, each year that the data has been gathered from 1851 until now, there's an average of roughly 10 hurricanes or 10 storms per year. So with that, this is a 40% chance of a normal season. There's a 35% chance of an above average season, and there's a 25% chance of a below average season. Now, depending on what meteorologist you look at and what climate data sites you look at, those numbers could vary, but that comes right from the CPC. So with that, they're looking at between 10 to 16 named storms. 5 to 9 of those could be major hurricanes, and between 1 to 4 could be major hurricanes. So with that, one of the things that I always tell people is these forecasts are great, but the issue is it only takes one major storm to cause major devastation and major loss of life. So with all of that being said, with what we looked at for the 2017 season and now the kind of the prognostication for the 2018 season, what's our third major point here? Is it's to have a plan. Don't be one of those people that we see on TV that's at the lumber store trying to get lumber or supplies 48 hours out from a hurricane. You should have a plan and be prepared and be ready right now. If you're in a region that could potentially get affected by a hurricane, start looking through what your plan is for food, for water, for protection of your home, protection of your business, protection of your vessel. And if it looks like the hurricane or the storm could be great enough, what's my evacuation plan? Where am I going to go? How am I going to house my family? What am I going to do with my boat? And really work through that plan ahead of time so you know exactly what you're going to do to execute. One of the things that we saw last year from Hurricane Irma, as the storm track up to about 48 hours was shifting between the west coast of Florida through central Florida to the east coast and back. So there was a lot of shifting back and forth. And if you remember, that storm was a major hurricane when it hit landfall on the west coast of Florida. There were a lot of people that decided to evacuate, but the problem was there were a lot of people that decided to evacuate late in the game. So make sure you're prepared. If you have a business, make sure you have a plan for your business, but also a plan for your employees, and make sure your employees have individual plans. You have to be ready if there is a major hurricane that makes landfall in your area that you're going to be without power for at least 10 days or even potentially longer. You want to make sure that you have clean water to be able to drink and food that doesn't require electricity to eat. Also, you want to look at, depending on where you are within the storm area, is an evacuation plan. Sometimes the best plans are to pack up the family, pack up the dogs, the cats, the animals, and take off for another area that's outside of there. So make sure as we look at this 2018 hurricane season that you are prepared and ready. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate all the viewers. We've had some new viewers join us in the past couple of weeks, so we appreciate all the new subscribers. If you're not a subscriber to the channel, we would encourage you to subscribe so you get notified when we put new videos out. If you like the content, make sure you hit that like button so we know, hey, what kind of content do you guys want to hear from us? If you have any questions about any of our content or anything, don't hesitate to drop questions in the comment section here or whatever platform of social media you're watching. And speaking of social media, make sure you connect to us through our social media to join the conversation. It's detailed in the banner above and also in the comment section below. Remember, if there's anything from a company perspective that we can do for you when it comes to maritime regulatory compliance, maritime security or risk management, please don't hesitate to reach out to us because we're always happy to steer you in the right direction.